Welcome to this special 60-minute compilation of Reddit's finest petty revenge stories. Whether you're looking for something to keep you motivated during a workout, make your commute a little more interesting, or wind down with a tale before bed, you've come to the right place. These stories capture the art of getting even in the most satisfying ways. Small, clever acts of revenge that are sure to bring a smile to your face. So sit back, relax, and enjoy these tales of just desserts.
If you've ever felt used in a work situation, you might appreciate this next story. Did I go too far by getting revenge on my boss after he said I had to work overtime without pay? Hey everyone, I'm Dave, and I recently found myself in a situation at work that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. I've been working at this small tech company for about 5 years now. It's the kind of place where you wear a lot of hats, and everyone's expected to pitch in when things get busy. I don't mind hard work. I actually enjoy it when things get hectic, and you have to pull together as a team to meet a deadline. But something happened recently that really pushed me to my limits. So, we've been working on this big project for months, and the deadline was looming. My boss Tom called me into his office and told me that we were behind schedule and that everyone was going to have to put in some serious overtime to get it done on time. I nodded along, figuring it was just part of the job. But then, he dropped the bombshell. Just so you know, there won't be any extra pay for the overtime. We're all expected to do what it takes to get this done. I was stunned. No overtime pay? That wasn't just unfair, it was illegal. I pointed this out, thinking maybe he'd made a mistake or misspoke. But Tom just shrugged it off. We're a small company, Dave. We don't have the budget for overtime pay right now. But we can't afford to miss this deadline either. I'm sure you understand. I didn't understand at all. I've always been a team player, but this felt like a massive slap in the face. I've got bills to pay, just like everyone else, and now I'm being told I have to work extra hours for free. It felt like exploitation, plain and simple. I walked out of that meeting fuming. Over the next couple of days I started noticing that Tom was taking longer lunches, leaving the office early and generally not pulling his weight while the rest of us were busting our asses. It made my blood boil. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. And that's when I came up with a plan. See, I handle a lot of the IT work at the company. I'm the one who sets up the networks, maintains the servers, and makes sure everything runs smoothly. I realized I had a unique opportunity to make a point. So I started messing with the system. Nothing too obvious at first, just little things that would slow down the workflow. A few accidental glitches here and there, a server that mysteriously went down for a couple of hours, software updates that took longer than usual. It didn't take long for Tom to notice that things weren't running as smoothly as they should. He called me into his office, frustrated, asking why everything was suddenly going wrong. I played dumb, acting as though I was just as confused as he was. I even stayed late a few nights, pretending to troubleshoot the problems, without, of course, actually fixing anything. But as the deadline got closer and the pressure mounted, I upped the ante. I started accidentally deleting files, losing critical pieces of data that were essential to the project. I always had a good excuse ready. Oh, there must have been a corrupted backup, or I think the network had a hiccup during the transfer. Tom was tearing his hair out, but there wasn't much he could do. After all, I was the IT guy. He needed me to fix these problems, even though I was the one causing them in the first place. In the end, the project was delayed by a week. Tom had to go to the client and explain why we couldn't meet the original deadline. It was a disaster and he looked like a fool. The best part? When he tried to push the blame onto the team, everyone else pointed fingers right back at him. They were sick of his bullshit too, and when they found out I'd been sabotaging things, well, let's just say I wasn't the only one who had a problem with working overtime without pay. Tom eventually figured out that I was behind the technical issues and he confronted me. I didn't deny it. I told him straight up that I wasn't going to be exploited and that if he wanted to fire me, he could go right ahead. But I think he knew that without me, the whole IT infrastructure would collapse. Instead, he tried to threaten me, saying that I'd never work in the industry again if word got out about what I'd done. I just laughed in his face. I knew I had the upper hand. In the end, I left the company on my own terms. I found a new job at a company that actually values its employees and compensates them fairly for their work. But part of me still wonders if I went too far. Yes, Tom was in the wrong, but I sabotaged the project and made life harder for my co-workers, who were already under a lot of stress. I was angry and I wanted to make a point, but I'm not sure if that justifies what I did, so what do you think? Did I go too far by getting revenge on my boss, or was I justified in standing up for myself in the only way I knew how? I don't regret leaving that toxic environment, but I can't help but feel a little guilty about the way I went about it. Am I the asshole? If you've ever been let down when buying something used, this story might be for you. Did I go too far by getting revenge on the guy who sold me a lemon? Hey everyone, I need to get something off my chest and I'm really not sure how to feel about it. A few months ago, I bought a used car from a guy I found through an online ad. My old car had finally given up and I was in desperate need of a replacement. I didn't have a lot of money saved up, so I was looking for something affordable. When I saw the ad for a reliable, well-maintained car that was within my budget, I thought it was too good to be true. I guess I should have trusted that instinct. The guy, let's call him Steve, seemed friendly and genuine when I met him to check out the car. He talked it up like it was a great deal. New tires, recently serviced, no accidents, clean title, the whole 9 yards. I asked all the right questions, took it for a test drive, and everything seemed fine. The car drove smoothly, and there were no weird noises or anything like that, so I bought it on the spot. Less than a week later, the car broke down in the middle of rush hour traffic. I barely managed to get it to the side of the road before it completely died on me. I had to get it towed, which cost me more than I could afford, and when the mechanic took a look at it, he gave me the bad news. The car was a complete lemon. The engine was shot, and it would cost more to fix it than the car was worth. The mechanic even suggested that the car had been tampered with to hide some of the issues. I was furious. I tried calling Steve, but of course he didn't pick up. I left him messages, sent texts, but he ghosted me. That's when I realized I'd been scammed. I couldn't believe I'd been so stupid. I was out of a car, out of money, and feeling like a total idiot. I knew I couldn't just let this slide. So, I decided to get revenge. I knew Steve was still selling cars, so I started doing some digging. I found his new ads online and I created fake email accounts to pose as potential buyers. I would arrange to meet up with him, but I never showed. I did this several times, wasting his time and making him drive all over the place for nothing. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to make sure he couldn't scam anyone else, so I decided to hit him where it really hurt, his reputation. I created a website dedicated to exposing him as a scammer. I posted all the details about my experience, included pictures of the lemon he sold me, and even posted the mechanic's report that detailed everything wrong with the car. I found other victims online and asked them to share their stories too, which they did. I then took it a step further. I posted the link to the website in the comments section of every single ad he posted online. I made sure to send the link to anyone who looked like they were considering buying a car from him. Soon people started contacting me, thanking me for the warning, and I knew I was making an impact. Then, I found out where Steve lived. I didn't do anything crazy, but I did leave flyers all over his neighborhood warning people about him. I even sent one to his home address just to let him know that I wasn't going to back down. Eventually, Steve called me. He was furious, threatening to sue me for defamation, but I didn't back down. I told him I had every right to warn people about what he was doing, and if he wanted to take me to court, I'd gladly see him there. I knew he wouldn't dare because he'd have to explain himself in front of a judge. After that, he stopped selling cars, at least under his real name. Now, a few months later, I'm sitting here wondering if I went too far. Part of me feels justified, he scammed me, and who knows how many others. But another part of me wonders if I overreacted. I know I messed with his business and probably made his life hell for a while, but does that make me just as bad as him? I'm still out of a car and still trying to save up for a new one, but at least I know I stopped him from scamming anyone else, at least for a while. But did I go too far? Was it worth it, or should I have just let it go and moved on with my life? So what do you think? Did I go too far in getting revenge on the guy who sold me a lemon, or was I right to make sure he got what was coming to him?
If you've ever been cheated on, this next story might bring you some joy. Did I go too far by getting revenge on my husband after I found out he was cheating with my sister? Hey everyone, I'm Megan, 34-year-old female, and I need to get something off my chest. I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm not sure I regret it either. I found myself in a situation that pushed me to the edge, and now I'm wondering if I went too far. So here's the story. My husband, Jared, 36-year-old male, and I have been married for 8 years. We've had our ups and downs like any couple, but I always thought we were solid. We have a 6-year-old daughter together, and she's the light of my life. My sister, Becky, 31-year-old female, has always been close to us. We grew up together, and she was my maid of honor at our wedding. I trusted her with everything. She was my best friend. A few months ago, I started noticing that Jared was acting strangely. He was more distant, always on his phone, and would leave the room to take calls. He'd come home late from work, saying he had to put in extra hours to make sure things were running smoothly. I wanted to believe him, but something in my gut told me that things weren't right. Then, one night, I overheard a conversation that shattered my world. Jared had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he went to the bathroom, and a text came through. I don't usually snoop, but something made me pick up the phone and look at the message. It was from Becky. The text said, "Can't wait to see you tonight. I've missed you." My heart stopped. I scrolled up and found more messages that left no doubt about what was happening. Jared and Becky had been having an affair for months. My husband and my sister, I felt like my entire life had been ripped apart in that moment. I didn't confront them right away. Instead, I decided to play it cool and come up with a plan. I needed to make sure they knew that I wasn't someone to be messed with. I needed to make them pay for betraying me in the worst possible way. The first thing I did was start gathering evidence. I took screenshots of the texts, recorded their conversations when they thought I wasn't around, and even followed them to one of their secret meetups. I knew I had to be careful. I didn't want to tip them off that I was onto them. Once I had all the evidence I needed, I decided to hit them where it hurt the most. I knew that Becky had been having financial trouble, and that Jared had been helping her out with money, our money. So I drained our joint bank account and put everything into a separate account that only I had access to. I also contacted a lawyer and started the process of filing for divorce. I made sure that Jared would be left with nothing. He wouldn't even see it coming. But I didn't stop there. I knew that Jared's job was his pride and joy, and he'd been working on a big project that was supposed to land him a promotion. So I sent an anonymous email to his boss, attaching the recordings I'd made of him talking about how he'd been fudging numbers and cutting corners to make the project look better than it was. The project was investigated, and Jared was fired on the spot. No promotion, no job, nothing. As for Becky, I knew she'd been secretly seeing a guy who she really liked. He didn't know that she was having an affair with Jared, so I made sure he found out. I sent him the screenshots of her texts with Jared and told him everything. He dumped her immediately and blocked her on everything. Once I had set everything in motion, I finally confronted them both. I invited them over for dinner, acting like everything was normal. When they arrived, I calmly laid out all the evidence in front of them. The texts, the recordings, the photos. I watched as their faces turned white, as the reality of what I'd done sank in. I told them I was filing for divorce and that they were dead to me. Jared begged for forgiveness, but I wasn't having it. I told him to pack his things and get out. As for Becky, she just sat there in shock, crying and apologizing over and over again. I told her I never wanted to see her again, and I meant it. Now, a few weeks later, I'm sitting here wondering if I went too far. I'm not sure I regret what I did, but I can't help but feel like I destroyed both of their lives. Jared lost his job, his wife, and his daughter. Becky lost her relationship and her sister. Part of me feels justified, but another part of me wonders if I could have handled things differently. So what do you think? Did I go too far in getting revenge on my cheating husband and sister? Or was I justified in making them pay for what they did to me? I'm not sure if I can ever forgive them, but I'm also not sure if I can forgive myself for what I did. Am I the asshole? Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. At any given office, you'll find a blend of personalities, from the overly chatty to the obsessively organized. But every so often, you come across a coworker who makes you dread the daily grind. For Diana, that person was Carmen, a master at shirking responsibility and spreading misery. It all started with Carmen's notorious habit of commandeering meetings. Whenever a team project was up for discussion, Carmen would find a way to assign her responsibilities to someone else. She would often come to the meeting unprepared, then smile sweetly and say, "Diana, you're so much better at this than I am. Could you handle it?" And it wasn't just Diana. Carmen had a talent for dumping her work on anyone within earshot, leaving the rest of the team buried in tasks while she took credit for the results. Carmen's incompetence was never more apparent than when it came to handling important communications. Once, she was responsible for sending out a company-wide email announcing a major policy change. Instead of drafting the email carefully, Carmen hastily wrote a confusing message full of errors, then decided to forward it to Diana with a simple, "Can you fix this? I'm swamped." Diana, knowing the importance of the email, had to stay late to rewrite the entire thing from scratch. Despite her efforts, the confusion from Carmen's original draft led to numerous complaints, and Diana got an earful from their boss. Perhaps the most infuriating habit of Carmen's was her tendency to steal credit for other people's work. During a big client presentation, Diana had spent weeks perfecting the proposal. But when the day came, Carmen swooped in and presented Diana's work as if it were her own. The client was impressed, and Carmen basked in the praise while Diana sat quietly in the back, seething. The breaking point came just before Christmas. Carmen had been particularly sloppy, and her mistakes were becoming impossible to ignore. She'd recently handed off a critical report to Diana at the last minute, claiming she had an emergency and had to leave early. The report was riddled with errors, and when it was submitted, their boss assumed the mistakes were Diana's. She was called into a meeting where her job was on the line. Though Diana managed to explain the situation and save her position, the close call left her furious and humiliated. Diana stewed over the near disaster, her anger bubbling until she decided she couldn't let Carmen get away with her behavior any longer. She wanted revenge, but something subtle, something that would hit Carmen where it hurt. She remembered hearing through the office grapevine that Carmen had recently gone through a messy divorce. Carmen's ex-husband, Mark, was a friendly guy Diana had met a few times at company events. On a whim, Diana reached out to him. To her surprise, he was more than willing to help her with her plan. They arranged a photo shoot where Diana wrapped her arms around Mark's waist, the two of them smiling like a happy couple. The plan was simple. Diana would place the photo on her desk, in a spot where Carmen was sure to see it. Christmas was fast approaching, and the office was buzzing with holiday cheer. Diana casually placed the framed photo on her desk, making sure it was in Carmen's direct line of sight. It didn't take long for Carmen to notice. She stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes narrowing as she took in the image. "Is that?" Carmen began, her voice barely above a whisper. Diana smiled sweetly. "Oh, this? Yes, that's me with Mark. We ran into each other recently and thought we'd catch up." Carmen's face turned crimson. She stormed out of the room without another word. For the rest of the day, she avoided Diana like the plague. The office buzzed with speculation about the photo, with everyone wondering if Diana had really started dating Carmen's ex-husband. Diana's plan had worked better than she could have imagined. Carmen's usual swagger was gone, replaced by a noticeable tension whenever Diana was around. But as the days went by, Diana began to question herself. Had she crossed a line? The photo was harmless enough, nothing inappropriate, but the implication was there. Was it cruel to make Carmen believe she was dating her ex, even if only for a short time? Some of her co-workers, who had suffered under Carmen's reign of terror, quietly applauded Diana for putting her in her place. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure if the prank had gone too far. Diana couldn't shake the feeling that she might have gone overboard, even though Carmen had driven her to it. So Diana turns to the internet for a verdict. After enduring months of Carmen's toxic behavior, was she justified in getting a little revenge? Or did she go too far by involving Carmen's personal life in their workplace feud? As the office settles back into its routine, the question lingers in the air. Is Diana the asshole, or did Carmen finally get what she deserved?
My younger brother Ralph has always been the smart one in the family. He's a high school senior now, and there's no question that he's going to be the valedictorian. But while he's got the brains, he's also a bit naive when it comes to people, especially when it comes to girls. So, when he called me out of the blue, practically buzzing with excitement, I was curious. He told me that a girl, a popular, beautiful girl named Emma, had just done this big promposal for him in front of everyone at school. He said he was hesitant, but he said yes. I could hear the excitement in his voice, and I wanted to be happy for him, but something about it didn't sit right with me. I hesitantly offered my congratulations, but as soon as we hung up, I started to feel uneasy. Ralph is an amazing guy, but he's not exactly the type that girls like Emma usually go for. I didn't want to rain on his parade, so I kept my concerns to myself. But the more I thought about it, the more it bugged me, so I reached out to a few friends back home to see if they knew anything. One of them, Sam, had some news that made my blood run cold. He said there were rumors going around school that something was off about Emma's promposal. Sam did some digging and found out that Emma never actually planned to go to prom with Ralph. It was all a setup, a cruel joke. She was planning to stand him up on prom night to humiliate him in front of everyone as payback for getting the valedictorian spot over her. When Sam told me this, I was furious. Ralph had always been kind and respectful, and the idea of him being humiliated like that made my blood boil. I knew I had to do something, but I couldn't just tell Ralph what I'd learned. He wouldn't believe me, and even if he did, he'd be devastated. No, I had to find a way to turn the tables on Emma without Ralph getting hurt in the process. I spent the next few days coming up with a plan. It wasn't easy, but I finally settled on something that would give Emma a taste of her own medicine. First, I called Ralph and asked him about his prom plans. He was still excited, talking about how he couldn't believe someone like Emma would want to go with him. I played along, asking him if he'd gotten his tux yet, and he said he hadn't. That was perfect. It meant I could tweak my plan a bit. I offered to help him pick out his tux, and he happily agreed. The weekend before prom, I drove home and took him shopping. While we were out, I made sure to casually bring up the idea of getting a limo. I knew Ralph wouldn't think twice about it, he was too focused on impressing Emma. I made arrangements for a limo to pick Ralph up on prom night, but I made sure it wouldn't show up at his house. Instead, I had it pick him up at a friend's house, just in case Emma had spies checking in on him. I also made sure the limo would take him to a nice restaurant first, giving him the full prom experience. But that wasn't all. I made a few calls and found out where Emma was planning to be on prom night, at a party with her friends, waiting to hear about Ralph's humiliation. I knew what I had to do. On the night of prom, Ralph was a bundle of nerves, but he looked great in his tux. The limo showed up right on time, and I watched as he climbed in, excited but still a little unsure. I wished him luck and told him to have a great time. He had no idea what was really going on. After Ralph left, I drove to the party where Emma was supposed to be. I parked down the street and waited. It didn't take long for Emma to show up, dressed in a killer dress but obviously not planning to go to prom. She was all smiles, clearly pleased with herself. I waited until she was inside before I made my move. I walked up to the house and knocked on the door. One of Emma's friends answered, and when she saw me, she looked confused. "Is Emma here?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. The girl nodded, still confused, and called for Emma. When Emma came to the door and saw me standing there, her smile faltered. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to keep her cool. I gave her a small smile. "Just wanted to see if you were ready for prom. Ralph's waiting for you." Her face went pale. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a picture of Ralph, standing outside the restaurant in his tux, looking every bit the handsome gentleman. "He's waiting for you at the restaurant. He's so excited, Emma." Emma stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She knew her plan had backfired, and there was nothing she could do about it. She had told everyone that Ralph canceled at the last minute. Now everyone knew she'd lied. "I guess you're not going then," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Too bad. He really went all out for you." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, speechless. As I drove away, I couldn't help but smile. Ralph would never know what Emma had planned for him, and she wouldn't get the satisfaction of humiliating him. Instead, she'd have to live with the knowledge that her plan had failed, and that she'd been outsmarted by the very person she tried to hurt. When Ralph went in the restaurant, he found his good friend Samantha waiting. She was wearing a prom dress too, and she was alone. She'd chosen to go alone, fully confident in herself. I knew she'd always had a secret crush on Ralph, but she didn't feel like Ralph was ready to be receptive to her yet. But when his prom date didn't show up to the restaurant, they ended up having dinner together. They laughed and talked. When it was time to go to the prom, he invited her to ride with him since she was in her car and he was alone. They danced, talked, and had a great time. They're going out again next week. After all this, I reached out to the scholarship department at Ralph's school and explained what had happened with Emma. She had received a full ride scholarship to a school of her choice, and they revoked the offer after finding out about her cruel intentions. Now here I am, wondering if I did the right thing. I mean, sure, I manipulated the situation, but it was to protect my brother from getting hurt. I didn't want him to go through that kind of humiliation, especially not when he was so excited about the whole thing. But part of me wonders if I went too far. Should I have just told him the truth? Should I have let him handle it on his own? I don't know. All I know is that I couldn't stand by and let someone hurt my brother like that. So, am I the asshole for turning the tables on Emma, or did she get exactly what she deserved?
If you've ever hated a soon-to-be in-law, this next story might be for you. I don't think I've ever hated someone as much as I hate Leia, my brother Lucas's girlfriend. From the moment she stepped into our lives, it was like everything about her was designed to get under my skin. But the worst part? Lucas didn't see any of it. She had him completely wrapped around her finger, and I was stuck dealing with her petty little games every time we were all together. Let me give you a few examples of the nonsense I put up with. Leah had this annoying habit of getting too close. Every time we were at a family gathering, she'd manage to find a way to invade my personal space. Whether it was standing way too close when we were talking, or casually touching my arm or shoulder while making some sarcastic comment about something I did, it drove me nuts. Lucas never seemed to notice. He'd just shrug and say, "That's just how she is." Then there was the way she would completely ignore me in conversations, unless she was putting me down, of course. I'd be in the middle of saying something and she'd cut me off to talk about herself, completely dismissing whatever I was saying. But if I made the smallest mistake or said something she didn't agree with, she was all ears, ready to pounce and correct me like she was some kind of authority on everything. Leah would even mess with my stuff. One time I brought a new game over to play with Lucas, something we'd both been excited about for weeks. Leah, of course, accidentally spilled her drink all over it before we even started. I knew it wasn't an accident. She smiled that smug little smile she always did and said, "Oops, my bad." But Lucas, oblivious as ever, thought it was no big deal. It was little things like this, petty, constant, and maddening, and Lucas never saw any of it. He thought she was great, and the more I tried to point out what she was doing, the more it drove a wedge between us. I was losing my brother to this manipulative, petty woman, and I couldn't stand it. But then Leah did something I couldn't forgive. We were at Lucas's place for dinner, and she made a snide comment about our parents. Something about how they must not have done a great job with me since I was still single and living in a bachelor pad. She said it in that fake joking way she always did, but it hit a nerve. I kept my cool, but inside I was fuming. That was the last straw. I couldn't let her get away with constantly disrespecting me and my family. That night, I started planning my revenge. Lucas is the type of guy who's always lending a hand, so whenever I visited, I'd ask if I could use his computer to look something up. He never minded. He'd hand over his laptop without a second thought. I saw my opportunity and took it. Each time I used his computer, I'd make sure to search for things like ways to pull off a surprise proposal, or how to choose the perfect engagement ring, or even will she say yes. I did this weekly for about 3 months. I knew Leah would eventually stumble across the search history, and sure enough, she did. She started dropping hints, subtle at first, but gradually getting more and more obvious. She'd mention wedding venues, look at rings, and giggle to herself like she had some big secret. Whenever we were all together, she'd shoot me these smug looks as if she thought she was about to one-up me by getting Lucas to propose. I knew better, though. Lucas had no plans to propose. In fact, he told me he wasn't sure he ever wanted to marry her, but he liked her enough to keep things going for now. He had no idea what was coming. It all came to a head one night when Leah couldn't contain herself anymore. She cornered Lucas after dinner and asked him point blank when he was going to propose. He looked at her like she had 3 heads. "What are you talking about?" he asked, genuinely confused. She crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes. "Don't play dumb, Lucas. I've seen your search history. You've been planning this for months." Lucas glanced at me and I could barely suppress my smirk. "I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't searched for anything like that." Leah huffed, clearly thinking he was trying to be coy. "Come on, Lucas. It's okay, you don't have to hide it. I know what you've been up to. I've even started looking at dresses." That's when it happened, the moment I'd been waiting for. Lucas, still baffled, shook his head. "Leah, I'm serious. I haven't looked up anything about proposals. I don't even know if I ever want to get married." Her face fell. She stammered, trying to recover. But what about all those searches?" Lucas shrugged. "I don't know who searched that stuff, but it wasn't me. And honestly, the way you're acting about this is kind of a turn-off. If you just left it alone, maybe I would have thought about proposing one day. But this desperation, it's not attractive." Leah was crushed. She looked like she'd just been hit by a truck. I sat there watching the whole thing unfold, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and guilt. I had set her up perfectly, and it worked even better than I had imagined. So here I am asking the internet, am I the asshole? I mean, yeah, I went out of my way to set her up, but she was awful to me, petty, manipulative, and disrespectful. I wasn't about to let her walk all over me and destroy my relationship with my brother. Still, I can't help but wonder if I went too far. Maybe I could have handled it differently. Maybe I could have just confronted her directly. But after everything she did, I couldn't resist the chance to knock her down a peg. So, am I the asshole for setting her up even though I hate her to the depths of my soul? Or did she finally get what she deserved? I never thought something as simple as a breakup would lead to this level of drama. But here I am, caught in the middle of a mess I never saw coming. It all started a couple of years ago when I was dating Missy. We were young, in love, and a bit adventurous to say the least. One night, we came up with the idea of making amateur videos for a porn site. It wasn't about the money. Hell, we barely made a dime from it. It was more about the thrill, the idea of being watched and doing something a little risque. The thing is, it was 100% consensual. Missy and I were both into it, and we planned every detail together. We'd text back and forth about ideas, props, and even the angles we wanted to shoot from. She loved the idea of it, loved being watched, and she was as into it as I was. After we broke up, we both kind of forgot about the videos. They were still up on the site, but they never got much attention. To be honest, I didn't think about them at all after we split. Life moved on, and I figured everything was fine between us. Fast forward 2 years, and suddenly my phone calls and texts to our mutual friends started going unanswered. The invitations to hang out stopped coming, and I was left wondering what the hell happened. It wasn't until one of my friends, Sam, finally caved and told me what was going on that I got the full picture. Apparently, someone had stumbled across our old videos and called Missy out on them. Instead of owning up to what we did together, she decided to throw me under the bus. She told everyone she had no idea the videos were on a public site, that she never consented to them being posted, and that I'd taken advantage of her. She painted me as some kind of user, a tool, even an abuser. My reputation was in the gutter, and all the friends I thought I had were gone. At first, I was just hurt. Then I got angry. Missy was lying to everyone, making me look like the bad guy when she was the one who had been just as into it as I was. I still have the texts she sent me. Texts where she talked about how excited she was to film, where she planned out the props, where she literally said how much she liked the idea of being watched. Now, I'm sitting here with all this proof in my hands, wondering if I should use it. Part of me wants to send those texts to everyone who's cut me off, to show them that Missy's been lying to them, that she's not the victim she's pretending to be. But another part of me wonders if that would just make things worse. Sure, I'd be vindicating myself, but at what cost? Would it make me look petty, like I'm just trying to drag her down because she dragged me down first? Or would it be justified considering the damage she's done to my reputation? So here I am, torn between clearing my name and just letting it go. Would I be the asshole if I exposed Missy as a liar? Or is it my right to defend myself, even if it means sharing private texts that could make things messy for both of us?
I work in a marketing department with a woman named Tasha. She's one of those people who's always trying to be the center of attention, always trying to make herself look better than she really is. Our department often receives free gifts from clients, mugs, shirts, little things like that, and Tasha is the one who usually handles them. The problem is, she's been caught before taking everything home for herself instead of sharing them with the team. She got written up for it once, and ever since she's made this big show of distributing the freebies, like she's some kind of gift fairy. It's irritating, but whatever, we all just go along with it. The real issue started when one of our clients wanted to say thanks for a stellar job we did on a project. They gave Tasha a free stay at a nice Airbnb as a thank you gift. The idea was that we could use it for a team building event, or just as a little getaway. Tasha didn't tell us it was a gift though. Instead, she invited a few of us from the team to join her for a weekend at the Airbnb and charged us all for our portion of the stay. It wasn't cheap, but it sounded like a fun idea, so a few of us agreed to go. The weekend itself was fine, I guess. The Airbnb was nice and we had a decent time. But something kept nagging at me, like there was something off about the whole situation. I couldn't shake the feeling that Tasha was up to something. A few days after we got back, I happened to overhear Tasha talking to another coworker about how the Airbnb was a gift from the client. I was floored. She had gotten the place for free as a thank you for the whole team's hard work, and she still charged us to stay there. I couldn't believe the audacity. I didn't know what to do at first. Part of me wanted to just let it go, but another part of me was furious. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. Tasha had taken advantage of us, plain and simple. She'd made us pay for something that was meant to be a gift to all of us. She hadn't even added the money back into the company coffers. I checked the receipts. She'd kept it. All of it. After thinking it over for a few days, I decided I couldn't stay quiet about it. I started telling a few of my coworkers what I'd found out, just to see if they had known about the Airbnb being a gift. None of them had a clue. They were just as shocked and angry as I was. Word started to spread around the office, and pretty soon everyone knew what Tasha had done. Tasha found out, of course, and she wasn't happy. She confronted me, furious that I'd spread lies about her. But I knew the truth, and so did everyone else by then. The atmosphere in the office got really tense after that. Some people thought I did the right thing by exposing her, while others thought I should have just let it go and not stirred the pot. So now, I'm left wondering if I did the right thing. Was I wrong to tell people what Tasha had done, even though it was the truth? Or did she get what she deserved for trying to take advantage of her coworkers? Am I the asshole for blowing the whistle on her? Or was it the right thing to do, given the circumstances?
I'm Patty, and if there's one thing I'm known for, it's my broccoli cheese casserole. It's the kind of dish that gets requested at every family gathering, and people always ask for the recipe. But here's the thing, this recipe has been in my family for generations. My grandmother passed it down to my mother, who passed it down to me, and one day, I plan to pass it down to my children. It's a family heirloom, and I've always believed it should stay that way. My daughter-in-law, Cammie, has been trying to recreate my casserole for years. She's made several attempts, but she just can't seem to get it right. I've always politely declined when she's asked for the recipe, explaining that it's a family secret that I'm not ready to share. She seems to understand, but I can tell it bothers her. A few weeks ago, Cammie came to me in a bit of a panic. She had a potluck at work the next day and needed to bring a dish. She asked me once again for the broccoli cheese casserole recipe. I could see how stressed she was, and I wanted to help, but I wasn't ready to give up the recipe, so I offered to make the casserole for her to take to the potluck. I spent the evening making the casserole, making sure it was perfect, just like always. The next morning I handed it to Cammie, and she thanked me, though I could see a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. Still, she took the casserole and headed off to her potluck. Later that evening, Cammie called me and she sounded thrilled. Everyone loved the casserole, she said. I've never had so many compliments on a dish before. I was glad to hear it, but then she said something that made my heart sink. I told them it was my special recipe. They're all asking for it now. I was stunned. Cammie had taken my family's recipe, the one I'd worked so hard to perfect, and passed it off as her own. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to be happy for her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she had taken something from me. Something that wasn't hers to take. Over the next few days, Cammie kept talking about how everyone at work now associates her with this amazing casserole. She even hinted that she might bring it to future potlucks and family gatherings. It was as if she had claimed it as her own, and I was left feeling hurt and conflicted. On one hand, I was glad that people enjoyed the casserole. I've always been proud of it. But on the other hand, it felt like Cammie had taken credit for something that wasn't hers. She knew how much that recipe meant to me, and yet she let people believe it was her creation. A few weeks later, another potluck was coming up, and of course, Cammie was asked to bring her famous broccoli cheese casserole. When she mentioned it to me, I felt a knot of resentment tighten in my stomach. The idea that she would once again parade around with my recipe, taking all the credit, was too much to bear. That's when I decided I couldn't let it happen again. If Cammie was going to take my casserole to the potluck, it wouldn't be the one everyone loved. I'd make sure of that. I prepared the casserole as usual, but made some subtle changes. I used less cheese, more broccoli, and added a touch too much salt. I even left out a couple of key ingredients that give the casserole its creamy, savory flavor. The result was a bland, overly salty dish that I knew wouldn't go over well. Cammie picked up the casserole the next morning, none the wiser. I watched her leave with a sense of guilty satisfaction, knowing what was about to happen. Later that day, my phone buzzed with a text from Cammie. She was distraught. I don't know what happened, but the casserole was terrible. People were practically spitting it out, and I had to tell them I didn't make it this time. I felt a twinge of guilt, but also a sense of vindication. She went on to explain that in her panic, she confessed to everyone that she hadn't made the previous casserole either, revealing that it was actually my recipe all along. The same people who had praised her before were now questioning why she had lied about it. Cammie was embarrassed, and the situation had completely backfired on her. The very thing she had used to boost her reputation had become her downfall. Now I'm left to wonder if I went too far. Was it wrong to sabotage the casserole just to prove a point? Cammy did lie and take credit for something that wasn't hers, but did my actions make me just as bad, if not worse? Am I the asshole for deliberately ruining the dish and exposing her lie? Or was it justified given how much that recipe means to me?
I'm Melanie, and I've worked at this company for 5 years. I've always been the type to keep my head down and do my job, but I've also got a knack for picking up on the little things others might miss. That's how I ended up in the middle of a scandal that I never asked for, but couldn't resist handling in my own way. It all started on a Thursday evening. I had just left the office, looking forward to a quiet night at home. I was halfway home when I realized I'd left my phone charging at my desk. It wasn't ideal, but I needed that phone for the next day's early meeting. So I turned around and headed back to the office. When I got there, it was eerily quiet, as it should have been after hours. I walked through the dimly lit hallway toward my office, but as I approached, I heard noises coming from the direction of the boss's office. I thought maybe he was still working late, so I tried to be quiet so as not to disturb him. But as I got closer, I realized those weren't the sounds of someone typing away at a computer or talking on the phone. These were different, intimate. My heart started to race and my curiosity got the better of me. I peeked around the corner and that's when I saw it. My boss, Mr. Klein, in a compromising position with one of my coworkers, Sarah. They were so wrapped up in each other that they didn't even notice me standing there, frozen in shock. My first instinct was to back away and pretend I hadn't seen anything, but before I could move, Mr. Klein looked up and spotted me. His face went pale, and Sarah quickly pulled away from him, her face red with embarrassment. I stood there, holding my breath, not knowing what to say or do, but Mr. Klein didn't give me a chance to react.
You didn't see anything. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll make sure your career is over. Do you understand?
I nodded, too stunned to speak. I grabbed my phone and left the office as quickly as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drove home, my mind was racing. I knew Mr. Klein was serious. He had the power to make my life miserable if he wanted to, but the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How dare he threaten me for something that was his own doing? And poor Sarah. I didn't know if she was involved willingly or if she felt pressured into it, but either way, it wasn't right. I couldn't just let this slide. I spent the next few days stewing over what had happened, trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want to confront Mr. Klein directly. He'd already made it clear what the consequences would be if I did, but I wasn't going to let him get away with it either. That's when I came up with a plan. It was risky, but if I played it right, I could expose Mr. Klein without directly implicating myself. Did you notice how Mr. Klein and Sarah have been spending a lot of time together lately? I'd say to a coworker over lunch. I wonder what they're working on that's keeping them so close. It didn't take long for the office rumor mill to start turning. People began to whisper about Mr. Klein and Sarah, speculating about whether there was something going on between them. I made sure to drop a few more hints whenever I could, all while keeping a straight face and acting like I was just as clueless as everyone else. But I didn't stop there. I knew Mr. Klein often had after-hours meetings with higher-ups, so I made a point of leaving work late a few times, casually mentioning to others that I'd seen his car still in the parking lot long after everyone else had gone home. I even accidentally left a document in the copy room that outlined a hypothetical scenario involving a boss and a subordinate having an affair, and what the repercussions might be if it ever came to light. The whispers grew louder, and soon enough, the entire office was buzzing with gossip. Mr. Klein started to notice the way people looked at him and Sarah, and I could see the tension building between them. He must have known that the rumors could ruin him if they got out of hand, but there was no way for him to trace them back to me. It all came to a head one Friday afternoon. I was working at my desk when I heard raised voices coming from Mr. Klein's office. I couldn't make out everything that was being said, but it was clear that Sarah was upset. She stormed out of his office, red-faced and near tears, and Mr. Klein followed her out, trying to calm her down. But Sarah wasn't having it.
I'm done. I'm not going to be part of your dirty little secret anymore.
The office fell silent as everyone turned to look at them. Mr. Klein's face was a mix of anger and panic, and he quickly ushered Sarah back into his office, slamming the door behind them. But the damage was done. Everyone had heard her outburst, and now there was no denying that something was going on between them. The rumor mill went into overdrive after that. People speculated about whether Sarah would quit or if Mr. Klein would be forced to step down. A few days later, Sarah did indeed leave the company, but not before a formal complaint was filed with HR. An investigation was launched, and while I wasn't directly involved, I could see the fear in Mr. Klein's eyes every time he walked past me. He knew that his secret was out, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Now, I find myself wondering if I went too far. Sure, Mr. Klein was in the wrong and he threatened my career, but did that justify my actions? I didn't tell anyone outright, but I definitely made sure that the truth came out in a way that ruined him and forced Sarah out of her job. Was I wrong for handling it the way I did, even though Mr. Klein tried to blackmail me into silence? Should I have just kept quiet, or did he get what he deserved? Am I the asshole for taking matters into my own hands and making sure everyone knew what kind of person Mr. Klein really was?
I'm Adrienne, 24, and up until a year ago, I was engaged to a man named Bob, who's 28. We were together for 3 years, engaged for 2 of those years, and for a long time, I thought we were solid. That was until I found out he was cheating on me. I never expected it, but there it was. Proof staring me in the face. I didn't think twice. I ended things, packed my bags, and walked away from what I thought was my future. But this story isn't just about the breakup, it's about what happened after, and whether I might be the asshole for something I did, even though it felt justified at the time. When Bob and I were together, we had this routine. We'd take evening walks around a nearby neighborhood to exercise our dog. It was a charming area with older homes, each with its own character and story. There was one house in particular that Bob always stopped to admire, a 2-story brick house with ivy creeping up the sides and a big wraparound porch. At first, I didn't think much of it, but every time we passed by, Bob would linger, staring at that house like it was something more than just bricks and mortar. I finally asked him about it one day, and that's when he told me it was my grandma's house. I used to visit her every summer when I was a kid. This house is where I have some of my best memories. One day, if it ever goes up for sale, I'm going to buy it. He'd tell me little stories about the house, how the front porch swing was where his grandma would sit and drink sweet tea while she told him stories, or how there was a little nook under the stairs where he used to go hide, taking his flashlight and some toys. He would play there in his little cave for hours. He even mentioned the blue shutters on the windows, saying his grandma had picked that color because it reminded her of the sky on the day she married his grandfather. Those details stuck with me. Fast forward a year after our breakup, I was still trying to piece my life back together, and I had moved on, or at least I was trying to. Then one day, while scrolling through real estate listings out of sheer boredom, I saw it. Bob's grandma's house was up for sale. My heart skipped a beat, and I couldn't help but click on the listing. There it was, just as he described it. The porch swing, the nook under the stairs, the blue shutters. It felt like fate had dropped an opportunity right into my lap. And I won't lie, a part of me wanted revenge. A part of me wanted to take something he wanted because he had taken so much from me when he betrayed our relationship. So, without telling anyone, especially not Bob, I bought the house. The process was quick. I had some savings and the price was surprisingly reasonable. Within a month, the keys were in my hand and the house was mine. Once I moved in, I couldn't just leave everything as it was. It still felt like his house, not mine. So I started making changes. Changes I knew would erase those memories he held so dear. First, I took down the porch swing. It was old and rickety anyway, and I replaced it with a modern bench that fit my style. I had the nook under the stairs demolished. I turned that area into a small pantry and storage area. I added a bookcase. It's in front of a window so it gets lots of light. And the blue shutters? I painted them a deep crimson red. The color is bold, striking, and completely different from the sky blue Bob's grandma loved. It's a statement color, one that says, "This house belongs to me now." I haven't told Bob about the house. He has no idea that the place he dreamed of owning one day is now mine, with all its details altered beyond recognition. I've seen him a couple of times around town, but we've kept our distance. I can only imagine what his reaction would be if he ever drove by and saw the changes I've made. Part of me feels a strange satisfaction, knowing that I've taken something he wanted so badly, but another part of me feels off. Did I go too far? Was it really necessary to change the things that mattered most to him, or was I just being petty and spiteful? I guess that's why I'm here, asking for a verdict. Am I the asshole for buying the house and making those changes, knowing how much it meant to him? Or was this just a way of reclaiming my power after everything he put me through? Sometimes I wonder if I've just become the villain in this story.
So, I'm a 32-year-old guy who recently bought a townhouse. My first real step into adulthood, or so I thought. I'm not exactly a people person, but I figured a townhouse was a good compromise between renting an apartment and owning a standalone house. It's got some shared walls, sure, but I wasn't too worried about that. My new neighbors, a young couple in their mid-20s, seemed friendly enough. We exchanged polite smiles and brief hellos in the hallway. They were nice, normal even. That was until I realized just how loud their sex life was. The first encounter was 3 a.m. madness. The first time I heard them, it was 3 a.m. I was in the middle of a deep sleep, dreaming about something peaceful like floating on a lake or maybe eating pizza. I don't really remember. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by what can only be described as wailing. I'm not talking about the kind of noise that makes you think, good for them, and roll over. No, this was ear-shattering, almost animalistic. The headboard was banging against the wall like it was trying to break free, and I could hear every gasp, moan, and shout as if they were in the room with me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I just lay there, wide-eyed, wondering if this was some kind of hazing ritual for new homeowners. I buried my head under the pillow and waited it out, hoping it was just a one-time thing. Eventually they finished, and I managed to get back to sleep, but it was a restless night, to say the least. The second encounter was a morning coffee ambush. A few days later, I was up early on a Saturday, looking forward to a quiet morning with my coffee and a book. I'm sitting in my kitchen, enjoying the first sip of my perfectly brewed cup, when suddenly, the noises start again. This time it's during daylight hours and I'm fully awake, which somehow makes it worse. The sounds were enthusiastic, to say the least. My peaceful morning was shattered as I sat there listening to what could only be described as a porno soundtrack happening just on the other side of my kitchen wall. I was horrified and also mildly impressed by their stamina. But mostly, I was just annoyed. So much for a quiet morning. The third encounter caused a work call disaster. The final straw came during a work call. I worked from home and I was on a Zoom call with a few colleagues and my boss. Things were going smoothly, and I was actually making some decent points when it started. Again, this time, it was even louder than before, as if they were trying to break some kind of record. My face went pale as I realized everyone on the call could probably hear it too. I saw a few colleagues raise their eyebrows, and my boss gave me a look that could only be described as concerned amusement. I quickly muted my mic, but the damage was done. The rest of the call was a blur as I tried to focus while my neighbors apparently tried to recreate a scene from 50 Shades of Grey next door. As soon as the call ended, I sat there fuming. This was too much. Something had to be done. After the work call fiasco, I knew I couldn't let this continue. But what could I do? Confront them? Awkward? Complain to the landlord? Pointless. They owned their place too. I needed to find a way to make them realize just how loud they were without coming off as a prude or a jerk. That's when I had the idea. I'd record them. Not in a creepy way. I wasn't looking to blackmail them or anything. I just wanted them to hear what I was hearing. So the next time they started up again, I grabbed my phone, hit record, and waited. Sure enough, within minutes, I had more than enough evidence of their performances. I listened to the playback, and it was worse than I thought. If I hadn't known better, I'd have thought it was some sort of exotic animal being tortured. Now here's where I need some guidance. I'm sitting on this audio, wondering if I'd be the asshole if I played it for them. Part of me thinks it's the only way they'll understand just how loud they are. I could invite them over, offer them a drink, and casually say, "Hey, I think you might want to hear this." Maybe they'd be embarrassed enough to keep it down, but another part of me worries that I'd come off as some sort of creepy neighbor who's been listening in on their private moments. I don't want to start a feud or make things awkward every time I see them in the hallway. What if they take it the wrong way? What if they get defensive or, worse, start making even more noise out of spite? I don't want to be that guy, the one who makes things uncomfortable in what should be a peaceful living environment. But I also can't keep living like this, with their marathon sessions interrupting my sleep, my mornings, and even my work life. So, am I the asshole for wanting to play them the audio, or is this the only way to get some peace and quiet in my own home? The sting of betrayal can hurt. This next poster was scrolling the internet when he found a familiar birthmark on one of the models. He knew her. Was he obligated to tell her? Am I the asshole for not telling my ex-wife that her revenge porn is online? I'm in a bit of a moral dilemma, and I'm not sure if I'm the asshole in this situation. A few days ago, I was aimlessly scrolling through the internet, as one does, when I stumbled across something that immediately caught my attention for all the wrong reasons. To give you some backstory, my ex-wife Kara and I were married for 5 years. We had what seemed like a good relationship at first, but things started to go south after our second year together. We argued a lot, mainly about money, how we wanted to raise our future kids, and other typical married couple things. I thought we could work through it, but then I found out she was cheating on me with a guy she worked with. The affair had been going on for almost a year before I found out. It was devastating. I'll never forget the day I confronted her. I had been suspicious for a while, late nights at the office, unexplained absences, and the general feeling that she was emotionally checked out. When I finally got proof, it felt like my world was falling apart. The worst part was that she didn't even try to deny it. She just apologized and said she'd been unhappy for a long time, which felt like a slap in the face. I ended things immediately and filed for divorce. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I've done my best to move on. I haven't really kept up with what's going on in her life, and frankly, I don't care to. But during my late-night internet session, I came across a local singles site that had some questionable videos and images. I didn't realize until I'd scrolled for a minute that it wasn't just a singles meeting singles site. It was a disgusting corner of the internet where people post explicit photos and videos of their exes as some twisted form of retribution. I went to click off of it as quickly as I'd arrived, but in the thumbnail, I noticed a birthmark that looked familiar. To my shock, there was a video on there that I immediately recognized as Kara. The person's face was blurred out, but I knew it was her. I'd recognize her tattoos anywhere. She had a small, unique design on her ankle and a birthmark on her inner thigh that, coincidentally, looked like the state of Texas. There was no doubt in my mind that it was her. The videos and photos were obviously taken without her knowledge, probably by her ex after me, as it wasn't anything I'd ever recorded during our time together. The person who posted the videos was clearly angry, based on the captions that accompanied them. "This is my cheating ex," they wrote, alongside other degrading comments. It was obvious that this was some sort of revenge for what she did to them. The whole thing made me feel sick to my stomach, but not for the reasons you might think. As I sat there staring at the screen, I had a million thoughts running through my head. Part of me felt like I should tell Kara. No matter what she did to me, no one deserves to have something like this happen to them. It's a total violation of privacy and dignity, and it's illegal in a lot of places. But then I remembered the hurt and betrayal she put me through, and a different thought crossed my mind. Do I really owe her anything? Kara destroyed our marriage. She broke my trust in the most intimate way possible, and even though I've tried to move on, the scars are still there. She never really apologized in a way that felt sincere. In her mind, it was like she was justified because she was unhappy, as if that made cheating acceptable. The way I see it, if she'd never cheated in the first place, maybe none of this would be happening to her now. So I made a decision that some might say was cold-hearted. I didn't tell her. I closed the browser and went about my life as if I'd never seen it. After all, she doesn't know those videos are out there, and if she ever finds out, it won't be from me. I figured that karma has a way of catching up with people, and maybe this was just hers coming back around. Besides, I'm not the one who posted them. Why should I be the one to clean up the mess? But now, days later, I can't help but feel a bit conflicted. I know what it's like to be betrayed and violated, even if not in the same way. While part of me feels justified in keeping quiet, another part of me wonders if I've crossed a line by not saying anything. Did I let my anger and resentment get the best of me? Would telling her really have been the right thing to do, or am I right to let her deal with the consequences of her actions on her own? It's not like I want to see her suffer, but I also don't feel the need to protect her after what she did to me. I've moved on, or at least I thought I had. Maybe this is just my way of finally letting go of the past, by not letting it pull me back into her life. So, that's where I'm at. I know it's a messy situation, and I'm sure there are strong opinions on both sides. But did I go too far by staying silent? Should I have warned her, or was I right to keep my distance and let her deal with whatever fallout comes her way?
When my grandmother passed away, she left behind a collection of jewelry that she had accumulated over the years. It wasn't a vast collection, but each piece held memories. She was a frugal woman, but she loved her baubles, mostly costume jewelry, or so we thought. When the will was read, it turned out